You are listening to a free version of the Majority Report with Sam Steeder. To support the show and get another 15 minutes of daily program, go to majority.fm, please.
The Majority Report with Sam Steeder.
It is Wednesday, May 24th, 2017. My name is Michael Brooks on a Michael Wednesday, and this is the four-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Mike Hanna, former Jerusalem bureau chief for CNN, independent news presenter and consultant for Al Jazeera and many other places. We're going to be talking about Trump in Saudi Arabia, Trump in Arabia, a new peace plan for the Middle East, which is actually an old Arab initiative from 2003 that is getting new life breathed in it. We'll discuss that, fallouts of the terror attacks in Manchester, 22 dead, and why covering these attacks the way we cover them plays precisely into ISIS's media strategy, and why we got to stop doing that. The Trump budget, it's a perfect Republican budget. Fantasy math and moral obscenity coming through, part of their core brand proposition. Mike Flynn, he wants to plead the fifth, but you can't do that if you're an LLC. Surprised that Republicans have not fixed that problem already. Sorry, Mike. Things are looking tough for you. And new transcripts of Donald Trump talking with President Duterte of the Philippines about North Korea, about nukes, and it's the sort of high-minded and comforting conversation you'd expect from those two gentlemen. And a new arrest in Brazil in a World Cup bribery case, bringing more heat on the right-wing government of Michel Temer, who, of course, was instrumental in getting rid of Dilma Rousseff just a little bit over a year ago for corruption, even as they are bringing new charges against former President Lula. We'll get to that. I'm back from Detroit. A lot of people were tweeting me about that and talking about how I was off at a brand conference during such an important news cycle, and fair enough. And I also got into a spat with some guy named, what's his name, Matt?
John Podhoretz.
John Podhoretz. He, I might be worse than the Holocaust, according to a guy named John Podhoretz.
Well, we just can't be sure if you are or not.
We can't be sure. Well, I mean, I guess we can't
withhold judgment.
You don't know, man.
You can be pretty sure.
Thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome, Michael.
I would like to quote tweet that. Let's just get to this sound really briefly before we get to Mike Hanna. And I feel like Sam because I've misplaced my sound sheet. This is a first. I will take yours, Matt. Thank you. So you have to wonder, how does a man like the Pope deal with meeting with Trump? Not just Trump, also both of his girlfriend and his wife, Ivanka and Melania, as well as this hanger-on Jared, who I guess isn't in this picture. In the full picture,
he's cropped out.
He's cropped Jared out. He's a total loser. The Pope looks really happy to be meeting them, and Trump is sort of weirdly postured there. But I think that the way the Pope, and as I said, I've seen the Dalai Lama actually do this. The one thing that these guys seem to allow themselves is they go for weight jokes. So Trump is there. He's shaking hands with the Pope, along with Melania and Ivanka. And the Pope goes for some solid weight material on the president. Let's check this out. This one isn't dope. Yes, sir.
L'età di comer por pizza. What do you give him to eat? Is it
So, yeah, the Pope goes, what are you giving him to eat? Melania goes, pizza. He's like, yeah, pizza.
Well, basically, the Pope says potica, which is a Slovenian sort of sweet roll type of thing. And apparently that's what Melania said, potica. And then Trump says pizza?
Pizza? Everyone's
And just
having
smiles.
fun. Everyone's enjoying themselves.
She didn't seem to understand what he was getting at either.
No. And then the translator was like, the Pope is making a fat joke about your husband.
No, I think she knew he was making a joke because she responds before the translators even translated it.
All right. But Trump, let's see. Maybe it will flip in a day. I watched several years ago, Artie Lang roasted Trump in Atlantic City. And this is one of these great things where you're like, now this guy's the president. And Artie had some great material. Artie was like, I remember one thing, he was clearly really drunk when he was up there. And he goes up there and he goes, you know what you should say to your barber, Donald? You're fired, right? And then he said, there's a lot of the hotels in Atlantic City are owned by the Borgata family. And so Artie said, you know, Donald apparently drove his daughter around Atlantic City and said, every building in this town is going to be named after you. He goes, which is really sweet and not true unless she marries a member of the Borgata family. And at the time, Trump was kind of like, yeah, we're laughing. We're having a good time. And then a year later, he was on Howard Stern. He's like, I hate this guy. He's a loser. To Artie while he was in studio. So maybe in a year when he has a follow-up meeting with the Pope, he'll hold a grudge. We shall see. We'll be right back with Mike Hanna on the Majority Report.
Equal rights and justice for all, rise and never fall. Tell themselves, boom, what they gonna do when enough for them not true. Say what they gonna do, them get slew, yeah. Who do you think you are? We're living in a small world. As wicked as you think you are, we're living in a small world. As bad as you think you are, we're living in a small world. Stand and see all those wicked men in the fire getting burned. That day will come when they will try to escape and there will be nowhere to run. That day will come when I shall see they handing over bombs and bayonets and bullets and guns. That day will come when Emperor Selassie shall rise the wall of the ghettos, youth them from out of Islam, yeah. And the day I would love to see their face for all those evil they do to the human race. Try to take things out of place, run away to space, shoot them in the air. After one judgment, you are gonna get the taste. When them find out that them can't.
Welcome back to the Majority Report. I'm Michael Brooks. Joining us now is Mike Hanna. He served as the Jerusalem bureau chief for CNN. He's now a news presenter and UN correspondent for Al Jazeera. Mike, how are you doing?
Very well indeed. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks for joining us again. I wanted to get your thoughts on Donald Trump's visit to Saudi Arabia. There's still something just kind of innately surreal for many of us about just even the idea of him taking a trip like this, him getting the special halal ketchup and steak special, and talking with King Salman. But, you know, what struck me is that in some ways, you know, there's a natural continuity between Donald Trump and who he is and who the Saudi royal family are. There's certainly a great interest in wealth. There's certainly a great interest in ornate and very complex building projects and gold and everything else of sort of, fusing kind of religion, late stage capitalism, and apparently, rhetorically, an opposition to terrorism. None of the kind of larger sort of questions about the Saudis' role in funding fundamentalism and different groups across the region were really addressed. And Trump seemed quite at home, and at home in a way that many American presidents have been at home in Saudi, in spite of the many challenges in that relationship.
Well, you left out as well, perhaps, common taste in interior decorating. But the key, all of what you say there is, completely correct. That there does seem to be some kind of connection that is particularly strong between Donald Trump and the Saudi leadership. But the other thing you did not mention, which is crucial to all of that, is a common enmity towards Iran. Right. There was nothing that angered the Saudi leadership more than the Obama administration's position on Iran. The signing of the Iranian nuclear deal was a great thorn in the Saudi side. So certainly this, at present, is the glue that keeps it all together. And introducing the other points, maybe a bit early of the Trump trip, of course, Israel. Once again, Israel, Donald Trump, Saudi, many, many differences in many, many ways, but all bound by one constant denominator, and that is an opposition to Iran. And perhaps that particular point is something that lies behind the reason for this entire trip, a very, very strange trip, first foreign trip to be taken by a U.S. president. Normal destinations, obviously the old allies in Europe, particularly Britain, maybe even just across the border to
Mexico
Canada. But the idea of taking a first trip on this massive Middle Eastern sweep, going to the world's major religions, as Trump's spokespeople put it, is something that is unprecedented.
Yeah, let's go more into detail on Iran. That's exactly right. So one of the things that Trump campaigned on, even with foreign policy, and this sort of drain the swamp thing, and obviously during the campaign it was entirely contradictory as well, because on one hand he would say we need to bomb the shit out of ISIS, and then on the other hand he would sort of say we really need to radically recalibrate and readjust our engagement in the world. One area where he rhetorically was a very typical Republican, and there would be very little daylight between like him and someone like Marco Rubio, was with Iran. So you're seeing an office now that in many ways he's conforming to type on foreign policy with a place like Saudi Arabia, with military action in Syria, and he's heightening and, pivoting firmly away from the kind of slight reform in the Obama administration's approach to Iran, or, maybe more substantive reform. But the contrast is, and what makes this just sort of almost embarrassing, is that at the same time he's there in Saudi Arabia and talking with the leaders of the Gulf states who have very problematic records, to say the least, on funding terrorist groups, on human rights, on everything else, Iran just overwhelmingly reelected Hassan Rouhani, reformist president. Reformist candidates did incredibly well in local elections. We're playing some brief footage here of people in Tehran responding to Rouhani's victory. And you see, just even in this footage, Iran is, complicated. We can take that down now. Has many problems of its own, obviously, but within its limited context, it actually is moving forward in terms of reforms. It is synchronized with us in terms of a group like IS, more so than the Saudis or the Gulf. So what's happening inside Iran really enhances just how kind of extreme this posture is, but it's a mainstream U.S. posture. It's not unique to Trump at all.
Well, I think there's a number of points to be made here. Number one, everybody seems to forget that the ISIL is a Sunni organization. As such, it is an enemy of Iran. It is just beyond all logic to see Iran, Shia Iran, as a supporter of a Sunni fundamentalist movement. That's point number one.
Right.
Point number two is that even the Trump administration has been forced into recognizing that Iran has kept to its side of the nuclear deal. Just a few weeks ago, the Foreign Secretary Rex Tillerson signed off on the fact that, yes, Iran has stuck to its agreement. And a week ago, the U.S. added, as required in terms of the legislation, another 6 months of the Iranian deal, recognizing the Iranian deal and its nuclear efforts to dampen its nuclear ambitions. Now, that, of course, as everybody points out, is a temporary thing. It's every 6 months. The Trump administration is very clear that it's continuing its review of whether or not Iran is standing by its nuclear commitments. But not many people, and certainly none in the Trump administration, actually talk about those details. Trump is very, very praising of Saudi Arabia, which everybody knows provided the bulk of the 9/11 attackers. There are all sorts of inconsistencies in terms of a long-term position being taken by the Trump administration. We're used to the flipping now. The things that he said on his campaign, very few of them are being carried out in this administration. There's still a lip service played to some, but in others there's a complete reversal. To take a look at his policy on North Korea, all of a sudden Donald Trump is saying, hey, I'm prepared to meet that guy. There does seem to be as well a natural affinity in terms of expressed opinions by Donald Trump towards strong-arm leaders. Right. They had to look at his relationship with the president of Egypt, for example, outreachings to people who many others would see as unacceptable strong-armed leaders who are attempting to dismantle human rights within the countries they control. So that's another part of the Trump personality, perhaps. He does, it seems, tend towards those leaders who are strong-armed. And he's made very clear as well, and he's made clear on this trip, we are not there to lecture, he says. A clear dib at the Obama administration, which
and
based
Bush,
its foreign
too.
policy on spreading democracy, as it put it.
Yeah, I mean, but then the question becomes specifically with regards to Iran and Middle East. And maybe, it's funny, yeah, maybe the real problem that Trump has with Hassan Rouhani is that Rouhani has too good a human rights rhetoric. And maybe if we could just get a new Iranian leader who wanted to start locking women up for going to soccer games again, we could be cool. But on the other hand, I mean, there is the sort of just unique...
Given his behavior to some leaders with atrocious human rights records.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but I think, on the other hand, the relationship with Saudi is so long-standing and the hostility to Iran is so long-standing that in some ways it seems like, the relationship with Saudi Arabia is predicated on we just had a major arms deal that was facilitated by Jared Kushner, and there's always oil. So, is this also just the sort of, again, with the specific bizarre Trump language and verbiage and just kind of personal oddness, is this just a revert to type for, this looks a lot like what George W. Bush was talking about with regard to Saudi Arabia and Iran as well?
Well, yes, but let's be very clear here is that the Trump policy as outlined at the moment towards Saudi Arabia in terms of basics doesn't veer that much from previous U.S. administrations. There has always been that relationship with Saudi because of the reliance on oil, because of the insistence on propping up what remained of any form of Middle East normalization. Sure, the Israelis get massive sums from the U.S. every year in terms of grants and military aid, but so did the Saudis before. Right. This particular sum, though, that was negotiated by Jared Kushner is something of a one-off. It's also a massive amount of money, and it also involves weaponry that previous administrations would not give to the Saudis, mainly because the Israelis objected to the Saudis having more advanced weaponry than they had. They argued that giving F-35s, for example, would upset the balance of power within the Middle East. Now, Kushner somehow got away with that. So contained within this recent deal that he negotiated, there is some very advanced weaponry which is going over to the Saudis, and there hasn't been a whisper of anger or opposition from the Israelis, who under an Obama administration, this deal had been done, would have been screaming loudly from the rooftops.
Livid, right. Well, I had actually heard, Mike, and I can't confirm this, but I had heard that Jared had actually asked if he could do that for his bat mitzvah. So maybe that's why. But I think that, okay, so then actually that's the other sort of irony, though, and we'll move to Israel in a moment. We know that despite not having official diplomatic recognition and despite sort of public condemnations, that traditional U.S. approach to the Middle East, which is based on Saudi Arabia and Israel as the kind of two sort of core allies and fulcrums in that region, that the Saudis and the Israelis actually share a lot of synchronized interests as well. They share a similar contempt for Iran. That's an ongoing dynamic. The Saudis and others can condemn and, promote anti-Semitic propaganda and everything else. But it's not really a core mission of Gulf foreign policy to improve Palestinian human rights. I think that's much more sort of rhetorical than substantial, although maybe for some of the religious elements in Saudi Arabia, it's important. But I don't think as kind of a matter of policy orientation. So then you have this odd, parallel development that basically Donald Trump, while on one hand appointing a very extreme far-right ambassador to Israel, while condemning the Obama administration for not doing everything it could to back Israel at all times, at the same time is actually supposedly resurrecting an old peace plan from about 2003 that was put together in Saudi Arabia that essentially, in kind of broad strokes, would, in exchange for a legitimate Palestinian state on 67 borders, a withdrawal from the West Bank, a easing of restrictions on Gaza, moving towards a complete kind of continuous and actual Palestinian state, there would be complete Arab recognition of Israel. There would be trade agreements implemented immediately. Really the kind of deal that someone like, a Shimon Peres would talk about in the 1990s in the sort of, heyday of the kind of, peace developments and two-state solution when people were optimistic about that. It does seem like it would appeal to Trump's grandiosity that he's the only person that could do this. And the Israelis, as you say, they can't react to the Trump administration in the same way they could to the Obama administration because there's so much more kind of inbuilt goodwill and, synchronized far-right politics. But at the same time, it seems pretty unbelievable that the Israeli government, as it's presently constituted, would ever do any type of significant settlement dismantling, which would be required for a deal like that.
Well, let's just get back to the deal. There's a lot of points there. The Arab plan, or the Saudi plan, as it was called back in 2002, in fact, drawn up by the Crown Prince, endorsed by the Arab League, and repeatedly endorsed, incidentally, at subsequent meetings by the Arab leaders as recently as this year. Now, the problem with the plan is that it has been the only plan that's lasted on the table. It's been gathering dust for the past 15 years. The basic plan is some 10 lines, as you point out. It's basically land for peace, based on UN Resolution 194, in fact. And Sharon rejected it outright way back then by saying that, oh, no, this actually now replaces other UN resolutions, so we can't accept that. It's about the only UN resolutions that Ariel Sharon recognized. But the plan itself is basically the only one that's been on the table. Now, subsequent U.S. administrations have kind of accepted it in part. George W. Bush did. Obama's then negotiator, George Mitchell, said, yes, this is a very important part that we will incorporate into our roadmap as he was working on at that particular time. But the problem with it all is that it could not gain traction, as you said, given the nature of Israeli governments that were in place, and given as well, very important to stress, a completely fractured Palestinian administration that had no unity whatsoever on the subject and what it wanted and what it would accept and what it wouldn't accept. All of that being said, though, and perhaps this is where Jared Kushner is coming in again as being the man who many point to this move to dust off this particular plan as a basis for whatever efforts the Trump administration sees. Things have changed since then. The rise of Iran has created that common bondage between Israel, Saudi Arabia, the U.S., and, of course, the rise of ISIL has given a common target for all involved. And importantly, too, there's been an ongoing move within the Arab world. There's always been there. Actually, not to care that much about the Palestinian cause at all. As you said, there hasn't been that much concern about Palestinian human rights over the past decade. There is lip service paid to it, but very little concrete, tangible action taken by Arab nations. So you do have, in a way, perhaps a window of opportunity, or certainly as seen by somebody like Jared Kushner and some of those advising him, that the time is now right, perhaps, for this kind of deal to be reached, that is actually a deal in the end between the U.S., Saudi, and Israel, and actually has nothing to do with the Palestinians whatsoever, who will simply have to come along for the ride because they have no option. And that precisely is the kind of drive that lies behind whatever ideas that Trump might have.
So then, in that sense, does it even matter? Because you talked about Palestinian unity before. Now, Hamas, while still engaging in, when sort of not a laudatory group, obviously, they have pivoted significantly in terms of what kind of deal they're willing to accept in preparation, primarily not because they see any type of negotiating partner on the Israeli side, but because they do want to create some type of unified political structure in Palestine. So does that move by Hamas matter, or is that all essentially irrelevant if this is just going to be a top-down plan? And in fact, if it's a top-down plan, I mean, one would assume it's not going to end up in a very substantive and accomplished way for the Palestinians. It'll be something that's imposed and something that will also have to protect all sorts of Israeli special interests that have grown out of a, decades-long settlement project.
Well, yes, but there's layers upon layer upon layer. The recent moves by Hamas are deeply significant. Mm-hmm. The moves to recognize Israel is a massive step in terms of Hamas dogma. Perhaps it's something that's forced upon them. Perhaps it's something that they realize is inevitable. The change of Hamas leadership also deeply significant. But all of these things may not have any relation to a negotiation process. They would have a relation to any reaction to that negotiation process. But it does make a movement towards a more united Palestine a possibility. That is, if the current Palestinian president, who's now into the 12th year of his 5-year elected term, would be prepared to embrace a democratic process. Hamas was democratically elected in Gaza, regardless what its critics may maintain.
Right.
The Palestinian territory does require an election to give it some kind of authenticity in terms of any process whatsoever. But then we get back to the point that I've been made and that you reiterated. Well, who cares? If this deal is done from the top down, what matters in the long run is reaction. Whether there's full participation or whether there's participation that is paid anything other than some kind of lip service in the wider negotiations, well, that is something that doesn't seem likely at present. And that is something that Israel would be unlikely to indulge in given the makeup of the Israeli government at present, or as it has been for a period of time now. And that is a deeply right-wing government, even in Israeli terms. You have a government that would not accept, as you pointed out, any reduction of settlement levels, that would not accept any concession whatsoever on Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, that would not accept a government that did so. And it has the power within the current makeup of the government to call a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister, who has repeatedly shown over recent years that if his power base is threatened, he's quite willing to switch sides in a flash of an eye. He's done that before. He would do it again. What's more important to Benjamin Netanyahu is to maintain a solid power base, regardless of what that entails, regardless of whom that means striking deals with. That is not the kind of recipe that would lead to a deal that would have any meaning for a lasting peace within the region, and certainly not any easing of the condition of Palestinians.
Right, absolutely. So as a final set of questions, we had this really horrific attack in Manchester over the past couple of days at the Ariana Grande concert. And I guess I'm curious from a journalistic perspective. It seems to me that it's quite clear, including according to some of their own documents that they've written, that this type of attack and this type of kind of making life just fundamentally unsettling and anxious and terrifying in a kind of day in and day out basis, maybe a bit different than the Al-Qaeda strategy of some type of spectacular, horrific, mega site attack, but just these kind of ongoing, grinding acts of really extraordinary brutality, that this is sort of the ISIS play. And I'm just wondering, when do we start, and can we, calibrating how we cover these things so we don't reward the very strategy that is so clearly being implemented by these people, which includes, obviously, an incredible media response and obsession with, the people who undertake these types of attacks.
I think that's a very, very important question, and one which we within the media have to continually ask. The creation of oxygen for what groups like ISIL want to achieve, the bubble of publicity that happens within their actions. It's a very difficult line. On one thing, the actions need to be reported. On the other line, that is precisely what ISIL wants. It wants publicity for its acts. But to get back to this current attack, this attack is extreme, even by the horrific levels of ISIL, and certainly far more intense than anything that Al-Qaeda carried out.
Yes.
And I'm not talking in terms of scale. I'm talking in terms of target. This was an attack that was targeted at young kids. Right. It was a concert which everybody knew would be attended by ages from 8 to 17. The bomb itself, from the little that we've heard so far about the actual device, a very sophisticated device, carrying within it ball bearings, nails to create the maximum amount of injuries, and also the attack itself carried out at a most crowded time of the concert, everybody leaving the concert. Now, the sheer cold-blooded nature of this attack is utterly overwhelming.
Right.
And it is, in a way, even groups like Al-Qaeda, in a way, had kind of red lines that would not cross. There was a great awareness in Osama bin Laden's writing about the tipping point in terms of which the drive to create more members would be offset by the action that would drive people away. Now, there's no thought like that in the actions of ISIL, which makes them a far, far more dangerous operator than Al-Qaeda ever was in terms of these isolated attacks. Once again, maybe not in terms of the grand schemes. Nothing can be, in a way, as horrific in scale as the 9/11 attacks or dramatic in its impact. But what remains is the occasional success, if one can use that term, in terms of creating that sense of terror, which is the aim of such attacks. And yes, the reporting of these attacks is something that has got to be tempered, tailored with the knowledge that that is the intention of the attack in the first place. So it is a very, very difficult line to walk along. And in a way, the way in which to report it is, as with all things, as accurately, as honestly, and as unemotionally as possible, difficult as that may be, given the targets such as we have just seen in Manchester.
Oh yeah, it's an absolute obscenity. I mean, I actually thought, from a political perspective, not from a journalistic perspective, but some people, this will be, I'm sure, the first moment that I will do this, and probably the last. I had no problem with, Trump calling them losers. I actually think that that's not a terribly ineffective frame, in the sense of you can be clear and honest about how obscene and horrific and cold-blooded the action is, but at the same time, why reify or in any way even indirectly romanticize what this was? It's just a complete obscenity. And I mean, there is a, this also goes back to it. There was a 2004 manifesto written by Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which in many ways is the precursor to ISIL, called The Management of Savagery. And they talk about attacking every single place within the Arab world, that could be, tourist location, hitting targets out of it. And the point is to create this constant sense of desperation, strain, exhaustion, so that you could be hit at any point, anywhere. And so the thinking kind of shifted from, I think you're right, that even bin Laden in a very cynical way had some sense of a kind of public relations aspect of terrorist targets. But there was still that notion too that, you attack great buildings, you attack embassies, you attack places with this, symbolic significance. And then this kind of management of savagery is, it could be, just at that mall in Iowa or anywhere, or obviously something as obscene as this, just so that there's this feeling that we're never settled. And then, of course, that plays into politics here, which are, not helpful from regards to how we actually respond and act in the Middle East, to our press culture, and to clamping down on civil liberties. I'm on an editorial there, but you can jump in whatever way you like.
I think that all of these things are terribly important to talk about it. And let me just add in the way tying our conversation together.
Yeah.
We've talked about the Arab peace plan, the Saudi peace plan. 5 days after that was introduced at an Arab League summit, there was the Pesach bombing, as it was called, in Netanyahu, in Netanya, in Israel.
Yes.
An absolutely horrific attack carried out at a Passover celebration. Dozens of young people injured, killed. Absolutely horrendous, horrific attack that would have no political justification whatsoever. Now, the consequences of that attack had immense ramifications for Palestinians in the years ahead. For a start, they killed the Arab plan at that particular point in the water because there was going to be no negotiation process in the wake of such attacks. And other subsequent attacks by Palestinian groups, which led as well to horrific counter efforts by the Israelis in very many ways, not least containment, not least ongoing settlement policies, ongoing repression of Palestinians in the territory in which they lived. So you have that. And what you have now with the Manchester attack is perhaps the optimist might say, well, this is a step too far. This is the beginning of the end for a group that could carry out such a horrific, obscene act. But there's another signal in this attack, and the signal lies in its target. And that is perhaps ISIL is not intent on gaining support or garnering support. It believes that support will come. It has no fear of turning away any would-be supporters by the ferocity and violence of its acts. And that in itself is a threat, is a major, major threat, that this is an organization that knows no boundaries, and that this is an organization that does not even look forward enough to continuing to bolster its ranks. It doesn't care. The ferocity, the obscenity, the shock effect of its acts are all that is cared about at this particular moment. Some may argue very strongly that's a very short-term way of operating. It means that you are going to run out of members at some stage. You are going to run out of steam. But the period between now and when that happens is something that's an immense threat to all who value any form of human life.
Absolutely. Well, Mike Hanna, as always, even when it's incredibly morbid and depressing, I appreciate your time immensely. Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, former Jerusalem bureau chief for CNN, someone whose work you need to follow if you want to understand the world. Mike Hanna, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michael. A pleasure talking to you as always.
Okay. Talk with you soon. All right, everybody. We're going to go to the fun half now. So we'll cheer up. I only have like 3 ISIS stories planned for the second half, so don't worry about it. You can join the show, 646-257-3920, 646-257-3920. You can't see them, but we have visitors with us today. Hi, visitors. Waving to them off camera. Say, a live audience.
Yeah, live audience.
The IMs are open. Become a member of the Majority Report today at majority.fm/become a member. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Find us all on Twitter. You know how it goes. We'll see you on the flip side.